In America, everyone counts, and the 2020 census is how that great promise is kept. Respond today online, by phone, or by mail, and help inform hundreds of billions in funding for education, health programs, and more. Shape your future. Start at 2020census.gov. NAACP chapter in Texas has produced a Black Lives Matter manifesto that attempts to create policies and procedures that include protections of African American people. The manifesto focuses on the areas of education, housing, business, social justice, and mental health, among others. We're going to talk with them about that very issue. But first, I want to go back to my panel to speak about Black Lives Matter. You have polling data that comes out that's showing a drop in support for Black Lives Matter. You have Donald Trump, who is attacking the Biden campaign. You see them attacking, saying Democratic cities, what they're doing in terms of supporting what they say rioters and looters. The question for you, Joseph, from your perspective, being a Republican, do you think Democrats are going to have a problem here in that these attacks appealing to, let's be clear, white, rural, or suburban voters, portraying these cities as on fire, and then that's led to this 13-point drop in support for Black Lives Matter, where it was earlier after the death of George Floyd to where it is now, from 61% down to 48%?
Look, this is nothing new. I mean, we can talk about the approval ratings for Dr. King while he was alive. We can talk about the approval ratings for Malcolm X while he was alive. And yes, when we're dealing with nationwide upheaval, where we've got fires burning from Minneapolis to Kenosha, that is going to have an impact on perception. And it's easy for us to talk about the fact that, over 90% of the protests were peaceful, but that still does leave a tremendous amount of damage in the wake. We've got over millions of dollars in damage to police vehicles in New York City. All of those things do have an impact, and it becomes very difficult for your average person who already feels as if they're out of their depth on something like Black Lives Matter to connect the thread. To understand how the pain and suffering of something like happened to George Floyd, or something that happened to Ahmaud Arbery, is connected to the looting that we see. And so I think it's our job, I think those of us who have the opportunity to be in media, to try to get people to stay focused, to do what I try to do, at least as a Republican, to get people to separate the difference between people in the streets trying to proclaim Black lives and Black Lives Matter, Inc. I think that if there was a fatal flaw in the movement, it's the fact that there was some hyper-partisanship built into the infrastructure that came out of Black Lives Matter. But as I've told people many times, if we are a party of people that understands that the Constitution is a safeguard for my Second Amendment rights and not the NRA, that we should also be able to understand that Black Lives Matter, Inc. is the outgrowth of Black people taking to the streets spontaneously to try to proclaim their right to live, to their right to liberty, their right to justice. And so I think if we can focus on that message, that will maybe staunch some of the bleeding that we see towards people who intuitively understood the aftermath of George Floyd, now no longer feeling as if they can stand shoulder to shoulder in the fight for equality and justice.
Let's go to Avis, your thoughts about that in terms of, again, the impact on this campaign. Obviously, you have Trump Republicans constantly saying that Joe Biden must denounce protesters, denounce looting, denounce rioting, things along those lines.
Right. So what's happened here is that the Trump campaign has used this as a battering ram to stoke white fear. Who couldn't see that coming, right? We should know that would happen. But how to deal with that, though, is that there needs to be a response. And I think the response need not only be from Biden, it needs to be from some leadership within BLM. And I know you might say that's an oxymoron to talk about leadership in an organization that's famously without, quote unquote, leaders. But the reality is we've seen the studies and we know that there are outside interests who have infiltrated Black Lives Matter's protests, I believe, specifically to undermine the effectiveness of that particular movement. We know that you have this administration hammering on it every day, villainizing it every day with the hopes of using it as a political tool. And just plain understanding of communications, of messaging, of politics would let you know that the more that you let these charges go unanswered and the more that you let the fact that other people are using your movement as a cloak for their own nefarious ends without having any sort of retort to that, the greater likelihood it is that support for that movement will fall. It was completely predictable. So I'm hoping that we will see some sort of retort. This particular move, political as it may be, as we've seen, is effective. And it's my concern that it's going to continue to be effective as we move even closer to the election.
What about that, Mustafa? Because I've heard other people say the exact same thing, but the reality is the way Black Lives Matter is structured. We had Patrice Cullors on the show, and it took a lot of explaining to get people to understand, like, what's the difference between the Black Lives Matter global network and then the movement for Black Lives. You have this whole decentralized organization, and you haven't seen that. And I've had other people who reached out, and they said that they're not going to issue that kind of statement or denounce it, because you've got others who say, you know what, allow them to do what they do. And so, do you think that that's an issue that BLM should make some kind of statement? Because, you know, I've been sort of raising the whole point, because like we had the brother from Kenosha. My biggest thing is, who are these white folks? It's like, and then when he said, hey, our protests have been different from their protests there, then I'm kind of like, okay, well, who the hell are these people? And then the same thing in Portland. So you got people who are so-called protesting in your name, but are they legitimate?
You got to have consistency of messaging, and you've got to. I mean, Amos hit it on the head. You know, when you don't have the right types of messaging that help folks to understand who you are, what you stand for, and there's consistency in that, then you will have outside folks who will continue to reframe the narrative. And when you don't have the resources dedicated to make that happen, you know, folks are just now understanding, even though many of us understood, the value of what CAP was doing. The exact same thing now with Black Lives Matter. If you don't have that messaging that's happening to continually educate folks, to keep folks grounded in the reality of the positive changes you are trying to make, then it will be co-opted. And if you don't have shows that are willing to continue to talk about it like you do on this show, then you're also going to lose the opportunity to make sure that people understand exactly what you stand for and exactly what your message is.
Joining us right now is Kimberley Yancy. She is president of the Dickinson-Bay Area NAACP, located in the Galveston, Houston area. Glad to have you here, Kimberley. So, Kimberley, this manifesto, exactly what is it? How does it differ from the actual agenda or points put out by the official Black Lives Matter organization?
Well, I believe our manifesto is customized for our county. The amazing thing about the Black Lives Matter is that it is decentralized. And it's so decentralized that it can be customized to fit the brand of racism for different areas. In Galveston County, you're from Houston, you know, we have our own brand of racism here. So our manifesto is to make people aware of what's happening in the area of housing in Galveston County, the area of education, and the area of criminal justice. And so we're hoping that this framework, this manifesto, would be a model for other similar sized cities in America. As we know, a lot of the Republicans have determined that, hey, we're not going to win the Democratic big cities. So our strategy is to go after those smaller cities, those smaller counties, and flip them red. And they've been very effective in doing that. So what we're trying to do is show other counties. Our county has about 450,000 people in it. We're right outside of Houston. So we're trying to give a framework and to make people aware of what we're dealing with. I am excited about the Black Lives Matter. Even I'm a part of the NAACP. And let's just be frank, the Black Lives Matter movement is facing some of the same critiques that the NAACP faced in 1909. where other people try to grab the narrative. But I'm excited because they're young, they're tired of the same way of doing things, and they're doing it different. And so we're grabbing hold of that, and we're running with that role. And we had a 250-person march down the streets of Dickinson 2 weeks ago. A week later, we came out with our manifesto, and we're about to do a live town hall meeting on September 28th to give articulation to what is happening in our county.
So, and moving forward with that, you are defining it in a certain way. And obviously, you're running the NAACP chapter there, which means that your chapter is involved with that. We've seen some friction here. So, for instance, when they had the protest in Portland, the Portland NAACP leader was very vocal against the sort of actions they saw that were supposedly being done in the name of Black Lives Matter. So is it also important for you to control the messaging, to control the narrative, and then control the agenda? And then not have folks from other places somehow come in and then they're doing whatever in the name of your effort?
They will try to do that. And I do believe that they've done that with the NAACP and tried to dog us in our name. That is not new. That is something that has happened with different groups. Is that a concern? Yes. I'm an American history teacher. I'm very concerned about our democracy being and our narrative being hijacked. However, if we continue to get the message out, because right now, the NAACP is not garnering headlines. The Black Lives Matter movement is. And when you say Black Lives Matter, everyone's heads turns to listen. We have a captivating audience, and I think it's time we take advantage of that. There will always be people who try to take our narrative and say it the way they want to say it. They've been doing that. Our issue here in the area is trying to get rid of the Confederate statue. And I had one of my white friends say, well, it's never been a problem before. It's always been a problem in the past. You never listen. Now you're listening. So I think that's something that in our movement, we're always going to have to be faced with someone hijacking our narrative. But right now, they've got some momentum. They've got the brand. Let's go with it and get some change done. And that's what we're doing at the NAACP.
All right, then. Well, we certainly appreciate you joining us. Thank you so very much. And good luck with it.
Thank you.
All right, folks, back to our Roland Martin Unfiltered video in just one moment. As our community comes together to support the fight against racial injustice, I want to take a second to talk about one thing we can do to ensure our voices are heard. Not tomorrow, but now. Have your voices heard in terms of what kind of future we want by taking the 2020 census today at 2020census.gov? Now, folks, let me help you out. The census is a count of everyone living in the country. It happens once every 10 years. It is mandated by the U.S. Constitution. The thing that's important is that the census informs funding, billions of dollars, how they are spent in our communities every single year. I grew up in Clinton Park in Houston, Texas, and we wanted new parks and roads and a senior citizen center. Well, the census helps inform all of that and where funding goes. It also determines how many seats your state will get in the U.S. House of Representatives. Young Black men and young children of color are historically undercounted, which means a potential loss of funding of services that helps our community. Folks, we have the power to change that. We have the power to help determine where hundreds of billions in federal funding go each year for the next 10 years. Funding that can impact our community, our neighborhoods, and our families and friends. Folks, responses are 100% confidential and can't be shared with your landlord, law enforcement, or any government agency. So please take the 2020 census today. Shape your future. Start at 2020census.gov.